Hey, what's going on, guys? It's BrainBean here again. With Razer putting out their new Opto-Mechanical switch, I thought it's the perfect opportunity to update my Razer Switch Comparison video to include that new switch and also talk about some changes that they've made to their classic switches as well. So we're going to start it off just by going over the stats of each switch. We'll do a typing test, of course, and then I'm just going to talk to you guys a little bit about what applications I think best fit each switch. So we're going to start it off with the trusty Razer Green switch. Now, just by looking at it, you can tell that they've made it a little bit different, and I'll talk about why that is here in just a second. But the trusty Razer Green switch is a clicky and tactile switch, meaning that you feel a tactile bump as well as hear an audible click when the switch actuates. And what that means is basically when the keystroke registers in the computer. Now, the stats on the Razer Green switch are they have a 50 grams actuation force, which is essentially how much is required to press down the key. They have a 1.9 millimeter actuation distance, which means when it actually registers in the computer, and then a 4 millimeter total travel distance. Now, these switches are rated to last 80 million keystrokes, which is a plenty of time that'll last you for many, many years. But what you'll notice a little bit different on these green switches is they have these little walls on the stems of the switches. And these pretty much correct the biggest problem that I've had with all the Razer switches, in that they have a lot of key wobble. And by having these walls, they kind of stabilize the switch and make it so that there's almost no key wobble in them now. So it's a huge improvement. So from there, we're going to move on to the orange switches. Now, the orange switches have pretty much the exact same stats as the green. The only major difference being that they have a slightly less key press at 45 grams, as well as they don't have the click. So you'll still feel that tactile bump there. You just won't have the loud clicking. So moving on to the yellow switch. Now, the yellow switch is a linear switch, and it's also a little bit faster than the green or the orange. Now, being a linear switch, it basically means that it doesn't have the bump that the orange has, and it doesn't have a click either. So it's a smooth experience all the way down until you bottom out the key. Now, the big thing here is that you won't feel when the switch actuates like you will with the orange or the greens. And it's a faster switch, like I said, which means that it has a 1.2 millimeter actuation distance and a 3.5 millimeter total travel. So the main thing with the yellows is that it gives you that smooth, quick experience, but it's not ideal necessarily for typists and things like that. All right, so moving on to the new Razer Purple switch, or the Opto-Mechanical switch. Now, the big thing with these switches, obviously, is that they are optical switches, and we're gonna just first talk about what that means so that we can kind of understand the rest of the changes to the switch. So an optical switch essentially uses light to register the keystroke versus using actual mechanical contacts, which these do. So a mechanical switch has two metal contact points, and when the switch pushes down, they touch together, and that's what sends the signal to the computer. For the optical switch, basically what's happening is you have a small laser inside shooting light, and it's being blocked by the switch. Now, when you depress the switch down, it lets that light continue through, which hits a sensor and sends the signal to the computer much faster than you could when relying just on mechanical contacts. So the stats on the Razer Opto-Mechanical switch is that these switches have a 45 gram actuation force. They have a 1.5 millimeter actuation distance, so they're a little bit faster than the green switches are. They have a 3.5 millimeter total travel, so again, a little bit shorter than the greens. And these are rated to have a 100 million keystroke lifespan. And the reason that these switches have a longer lifespan is that by not having those metal contact points that can corrode over time or get worn out with constant use, they actually hold up a little bit better because they don't have any of those crucial pieces touching each other, because it just relies on that optical sensor. Another thing you'll notice with these Opto-Mechanical switches, if you look at my giant visual aid here, is that they have stabilizers running on either side of them, almost kind of like Coster stabilizers for your space bar or, your bigger keys like that. And every individual switch has these stabilizers running on either side. And so what that does is it just keeps it very, very stable and smooth. If you put a keycap on here and you try to wiggle it around, they have virtually zero key wobble. So it makes them just very stable and smooth switches to use. Now, right now, the Razer Opto-Mechanical switches are only offered in a clicky switch. And the main differences between the greens and the Opto-Mechanicals is that they're a lighter key press. So you'll get kind of that experience of using the browns or the yellows with that lighter touch, but you still get the click that you would from the greens. And you can definitely notice the difference between the click and how hard you actually have to push down on it. Now, in the future, I would say it's very possible and probable that we will see a non-clicky and maybe even a linear version of this Switch, and that's something I'm definitely hoping. As somebody who likes oranges and browns myself, I would like to see that there, but right now they're only offered in the clicky. So now that you're familiar with the specs of each Switch, let's cut over to a couple of sound tests so you can hear how they compare. All right, so now that you've gotten to hear the switches, let's talk about why you would use certain ones. Now, the rule that I always fall back on is if you can, you should always get your hands on each different type of switch and try them out for yourself, because what might be perfect for you might be totally different for somebody else. And there's no hard and fast rule as to which application is mandatory for which type of switch. Now, starting things off, I will say that the clicky tactile switches, they're ideal for typists. They're really good for games like MOBAs or MMOs, things like that, where feeling that key press is important because you can know you cast that spell or know you use that ability and you have that feedback there. So something like the orange or something like the green is really good for playing those types of games. If you're a streamer, I would definitely recommend moving away from the clicky, just because you don't have to noise gate your mic and you don't have to have that clicky going over your stream if it does pick up every once in a while. So my kind of go-to for streaming and playing those types of games would be an orange switch. Now, the yellow switch is not ideal for typists in that super short actuation distance makes it really easy to accidentally press keys when you're typing. Now, you can definitely get used to it over time and you'll do much better, but there is a bit of a learning curve there to get used to it. What makes the yellow switches really good is for playing games like first-person shooters or action games, or something where that nice smooth experience and that short actuation just gives you a really good fluid experience. Now, how all of this factors into the optomechanical switches is that they kind of give you a little bit of everything. So they still give you that tactile feedback, but because they have a lighter click, it's not as loud as the greens are, and it's a little bit more agile, fluid feeling, clicky tactile experience. They're also shorter than the greens and the oranges are too, so you kind of get that quicker actuation that you would get from yellows without being too short to where you can accidentally press keys. Now, I feel like the 1.5 millimeter actuation distance is kind of the sweet spot, and you'll see that like the Roamer G switches from Logitech also use that 1.5 millimeter actuation, and that's actually what I personally use at work just for typing, because I liked having that kind of balance between being really fast and also not as slow as a cherry switch is. So the optomechanical switches also give you a much faster registration in the computer from when you push down the keys, because they have that optical technology, so it registers things a little bit quicker. So I feel like as it sits right now, even if you're not a huge fan of clicky switches, the optomechanical switches are definitely worth taking a look at, because again, they're going to give you that little bit of an edge, and they have a unique kind of feel of this like hybridization between all three different types of keys. And so, you know, hopefully that will help you guys decide which key is the right key for you. But anyways, guys, that's it for this comparison. Whenever a new key switch comes out in a certain line, I always try to do a quick comparison and talk about all the different stats of each switch and what makes them better for different applications. So I hope you guys found this helpful. Feel free to leave questions down in the comments, and also let me know which one of these switches is your favorite. Well, anyways, guys, that's it for the comparison. As always, give this video a like if you enjoyed it to show your support. And if you're new here, I'd love to see you subscribe, because I'm going to have a lot more videos just like this one coming out in the near future. You can also follow me on Twitter at BrainBeanGaming to stay up to date with what's going on with the channel. But as always, guys, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.